Good evening, everyone. My name's John Highbush. I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, and we are very pleased to have all of you here this evening. In honor of our men and women in uniform who protect and defend our freedom around the world, please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Before we get started, I would like to recognize a special guests that we have in the audience this evening. Everyone, please say hello to former Congressman Elton Gallagher and his wife, Janice. I'm sure, in fact, I see we have some Reagan Library regulars in the audience tonight. If you're one of them, you might be experiencing just a little bit of deja vu. I say that because it was at about this time last year, in fact, in October, that we welcomed to this stage the 116th governor of the state of South Carolina and the 29th ambassador to the United Nations. At that time, Ambassador Nikki Haley was here as part of our Time for Choosing speaker series. This time she's come to share with us her newest book. Just to be clear, we hope Ambassador Haley comes back as often as she'd like. We love having her here. In fact, we think we should go ahead and schedule her appearance as an annual tradition. It's kind of like Nikki Haley Day at the Reagan Library. Speaking of scheduling, we really should have hosted this event yesterday. I say that because former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's 97th birthday was yesterday, and it is clear from the title of Nikki's book that she's a Thatcher fan too. Obviously, so too was Ronald Reagan. President Reagan and Prime Minister Thatcher shared an unshakable commitment to conservative values and most especially to freedom. Their partnership helped bring an end to Soviet communism and a path towards freedom for millions of people trapped in what were once captive nations. Reagan and Thatcher were political soulmates. Lady Thatcher's words did indeed inspire the title of Ambassador Haley's book. She reminded us that, quote, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. Well, Ambassador Haley has been demonstrating how to get things done since she burst onto the national scene in 2010 when she was elected the first female governor of South Carolina. From rebuilding the state's economy and leading through tragedy and disaster to confronting adversaries on the world stage at the United Nations, Ambassador Haley has built a remarkable record of accomplishments in both domestic and foreign policy. And the world has taken notice. She's been ranked amongst Time magazine's 100 most influential and on the Forbes list of 100 most powerful women. There's no question she's been powerful and influential. But I imagine she'd simply say she was just getting things done. Her book shares part of her own inspiring story, including her unlikely path to power. But it's also the story of other women who get things done as well for the good of our country and the world. So this evening, we are excited to hear what she has to say. But I know all of us and many people across this great land are just as interested to find out what she will next do. Maybe we'll just have to ask. Before we bring her to the stage, let's take a look at a video that says it all. Lights.
Nikki Haley made history, taking the oath of office to become the first woman to serve as governor of South Carolina.
I think my differences have always had people underestimate me, and I think that's the fun I have, is in going and proving them wrong. When a challenge comes in, I'm so overprotective of the state that I just work. That's all I know to do is work, and I don't stop until I feel like things are taken care of. If you can give a person a job, you take care of a family, and we watched a lot of families get taken care of over the past couple of years.
President-elect Trump has asked South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley to be his ambassador to the United Nations, and she's accepted. The daughter of Indian immigrants is considered a rising star in the Republican Party. Haley would be the first woman appointed to Trump's cabinet.
For anyone that says you can't get anything done at the UN, they need to know there's a new sheriff in town.
There is a new U.S. UN.
You are going to see a change in the way we do business. For those that don't have our back, we're taking names.
If, for any reason, North Korea attacks the United States or our allies, the U.S. will respond. Period.
She's so tough and she's so consistent. And you just know you're not going to move her.
America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do. And it is the right thing to do. No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that.
What we witnessed here today in the Security Council is an insult. It won't be forgotten.
I like the message that Nikki sent yesterday at the United Nations.
This was the finest hour for Nikki Haley, I think. Standing up for the United States, standing up for Israel.
Standing her ground, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley making it clear.
I will not shut up. Rather, I will respectfully speak some hard truths.
Nikki Haley delivered absolute fire and brimstone. She dropped it right on the head of the Russian ambassador.
Ambassador Nikki Haley, who is really going after the Russians. She gives the evil eye.
So Haley shows us what American foreign policy looks like with the spine.
I wear heels. It's not for a fashion statement. It's because if I see something wrong, we're going to kick them every single time. We have to put forth real solutions to our country's problems, and we have to restore the people's belief that America is worth fighting for. America is the greatest force for good in human history, and we should never be ashamed to say that.
The biggest reason socialism is gaining ground is because capitalism's defenders are too afraid to speak up. We can't keep quiet. The truth matters, and it's time to tell it.
America is too nice. Too nice. Stop being nice to these thugs and these tyrants that want to kill us. We're not going to throw cotton balls at them. We're going to throw a grenade.
Here's what I just learned. Don't make Nikki Haley mad.
And if this president signs any sort of deal, I'll make you a promise. The next president will shred it on her first day in office. Just saying, sometimes it takes a woman.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nikki Haley.
We love you, Nikki!
I love you too.
In fact, we love you so much, we're going to put you in a selfie. If you don't mind, in the audience, we're going to shoot a quick picture before we get started. Nikki, now everybody smile.
Hold your books up.
Okay.
Ready. Perfect.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Another great-looking crowd.
You bet. You bet. Ambassador Haley, we are just as honored as you can imagine to have you here tonight, right on the heels of the publication of this terrific book, and we cannot thank you enough for coming.
Well, it's a pleasure. I mean, the Reagan Library is a true, it's a special, special place. So it's great to be back. But you are such a treasure. Yeah. And for those of you that know John, he's been so committed to this legacy for so long. It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. Thank you. Now, when I introduced you, I probably botched the definition, the description of why you chose this title for the book. So maybe if you could tell us all.
So the title is If You Want Something Done, and it comes after the Margaret Thatcher's famous quote, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. And the reason I wrote this book was the publisher had been on me for a while to write this book. They said there's tons of books on male leaders, and there aren't that many books on female leaders. And I kept saying, I'm too busy, I'm too busy. And then I started to think about when I was growing up. I remember looking around our small southern town, 2,500 people, 2 stoplights. You couldn't think about doing something wrong without somebody telling your mom. But I remember looking for female leaders and not seeing any. And in 2nd grade, I would go check out books from the library, and the only books I could find were on first ladies. And I loved the fact that they were partners to their husbands. I loved what they did behind the scenes. I loved how they moved the ball to make our country better. And so I thought, I have to do this book because I want girls of all ages, ladies of all ages, to have these stories for inspiration and motivation to know that we need you. This is a book about 10 women who were ordinary, but through their actions and the virtues and the sheer will, they became extraordinary. And so, I start the first chapter off with Margaret Thatcher, and she was a grocer's daughter and was very underestimated, and she was often made fun of. But as much as she believed in Britain, she believed in herself. And she stood her ground on what she knew she could do, and she eliminated 40 years of socialism in 10 years and is so revered today. So.
Well, in talking about ordinary to extraordinary, your book, in the front end, it covers what was this unlikely rise by this woman to the governor's office of South Carolina. And I wonder if you would there was a bill, I think, that you sponsored that gained a lot of attention. Tell us about that.
So I had been a legislator in South Carolina and was elected. I ended up defeating the longest serving legislator in South Carolina. It was pure ignorance. I didn't know you weren't supposed to run against a 30-year incumbent in a primary, truly. And I thought, and my reason for running was I thought they had way too many lawyers and they needed a really good accountant. And so that's why I ran. And once I had been in office, I got to work immediately. And in South Carolina, when bills would pass, they were all passed on a voice vote. So all in favor, say aye, all opposed, quiet, the ayes have it. But one day, they passed a bill that would give legislators pay raises. So all in favor, say aye, all opposed, nobody said anything, the ayes had it, and it passed. And I was so upset about it, I went to the speaker. We had a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican speaker, and I went to the speaker, and I said, this is why people don't trust us. And the very next day, I filed a bill that said anything important enough to have a debate on the floor of the House or the Senate is important enough for a legislator to have to show their vote on the record. The speaker pulled me aside and said, we don't need to have this. We will decide what the public needs to see and what they don't.
And I remember going home to my husband, Michael, and I said, if I can't even get legislative votes on the record, what am I doing here? And he said, then fight. And so I went across the state of South Carolina and I said, did you know of all the bills passed in the House, only 8% were on the record? Did you know of all the bills passed in the Senate, only 1% was on the record? So if you didn't know how your House member voted 92% of the time, if you didn't know how your senator voted 99% of the time, how did you know who to vote for at the polls? People were in shock. They had no idea. But to put this into perspective, my first year, I was chairman of the freshman class. My second year, I was majority whip. My third year, I was on a powerful business committee. And my fourth year, I was subcommittee chair of banking. The year I wouldn't put this bill away, they stripped me of everything. I could take the well, and no one would hear me speak. I could draft legislation, and no one would co-sponsor. So I ran for governor. And I'm proud to say, and I talk about that in this book as well, I'm proud to say that one of the first bills I signed into office is now in South Carolina. Anything debated on the floor of the House or the Senate requires a legislative vote on the record. And we took it a step further and we did it on every section of the budget as well. And when I did the bill signing, we blasted Pat Benatar's song, Hit Me With Your Best Shot, while we were signing the bill. So it's a...
There is a neat story you tell in the book, if you would tell it briefly now. It's the fortune cookie story.
So when I was running against that 30-year incumbent, he was related to half the district. And I know, ignorance is bliss, truly. He was related to half the district. And, you know, my husband was driving the car. I was in the passenger seat. We put our two little ones in the back seat, and I was knocking on doors. And it got really, really bad. He had some racist stuff he said out there. He had gender things. He did a postcard that had his face on it, and it said, male Christian business owner. And then he had my face, and it said, female Buddhist retail salesperson, which was, none of it was true. So it had gotten really bad. And one day, Michael and I were sitting at a Thai restaurant, and I got a fortune cookie, and I said, I really need this fortune cookie to speak to me. And I opened it up, and it said, winners do what losers don't want to. And from that, I taped that to my laptop, and then I made sure I went everywhere. If it was uncomfortable, I made a point to go. I talked to people, even though his family was involved, you know, he was related to half the district, I still showed up and asked for their support. And, you know, so that's the story of the fortune cookie, which is also in the book.
Yeah, neat, very neat. Obviously, Margaret Thatcher, one of your heroes in the book. Now, her rise to fame was in that time frame, the mid to late 70s, and where there was lots of problems in this world and here in the United States. I wonder if you see any parallels to her time in her rise to prime minister and the present situation.
I mean, I think you look, and they had a brutal economy at the time, very similar to what we're seeing globally now, and I think what Britain's going through now and what America's feeling. And there were some tough decisions that had to be made, but one of the best things was she really thought that government didn't need to be doing everything. So she privatized the airlines. She privatized the steel industry. She privatized certain parts that government was handling. And she cut taxes and took a lot of heat from her conservative caucus about it. And they actually, you know, all the press was giving her a hard time saying, you need to take a U-turn and reverse all the things you did. And she gave a speech to the conservative body and said, you can take a U-turn if you want to, but the lady is not for turning. Mm-hmm. And she stood her ground and was proven right in the end, because she knew that if she just stayed on course, it might hurt for a little bit, but it'd end up better in the long run.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to surprise you now. I'm going to put a photo up on the screen, and I want you to tell me the story of this selfie. Who is that you're with?
Wow. That is Nadia Murad. So Nadia, I met her. She is one of the profiles in the book. I met her at the United Nations. She was a young girl that lived in a Yazidi community in Iraq. Very humble. I think 10 or 12 of them lived in one room house. And ISIS came in and killed her family and took her as a sex slave and brutalized her. And on any given day, she could have gone and just gone into a corner and everybody would have understood. But she didn't. She wanted accountability. She escaped. She made sure that she testified in front of the Security Council at the United Nations, and she said that she wanted to be able to get all the evidence in Iraq to be able to hold her captors and all those that did this to everyone else accountable. She did it. She was able to get that resolution passed. They are now collecting evidence. She's been able to hold her captors accountable, and she has since won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she fights for human rights all over the world.
Another story while you were at the United Nations, a famous, everyone remembers the name of Otto Warmbier. But in your book, you tell quite a story about his mother. Tell us that story.
So, just like Nadia, when you read Nadia's chapter, I'll prepare you, it's difficult. It's very difficult to read, but it's so important. Cindy Warmbier's is very important to read too, because if you remember Otto Warmbier, here was this cute kid, he was salutatorian of his class, he was popular, homecoming king, went to the University of Virginia and went and did a study abroad and ended up doing a week's tourist stop in North Korea with a group of students. And he never came back. And for a mom to think about the fact she didn't know what was happening to her child, she just wanted to get him home. And I talk about in the book, when she got him home, he was absolutely unrecognizable. He had really been tortured. And she, one, having to see him like that, two, the fact that he passed away, she's another one, that she refused to just walk away. So she fought to hold North Korea accountable. She sued North Korea. They won. She made sure that everybody in the world knew what North Korea had done. And she continues to fight against the North Korean regime to this day. And it's true. She just didn't want to walk away. She wanted them to pay, and she didn't want anyone to ever forget who Otto Warmbier was and how awful the North Korean regime is.
You have a chapter in your book about someone who's not that well, Virginia Hall. And in that story, I want to quote from the book. You say, service requires giving of yourself, but it doesn't mean losing yourself. What did you mean by that?
Virginia Hall wanted to serve. She was an American. She very much wanted to serve. She tried to get a position in the State Department here and serve in the intelligence. They denied her. She then went to British government, tried to serve there. They denied her. She ended up fighting with the French resistance as an intelligence officer and a spy. And she lost her leg in a hunting accident. And so she had a wooden leg. And so she became the woman with the wooden leg. And she was able to rescue prisoners that were captured and bring them back, and ended up being one of the first female operatives at the CIA. But she was so determined to serve, not just her country. She wanted to serve and do something with her life. And what she did was remarkable. And when they tried to give her credit and they tried to give her praise, she would turn it down every single time, because she just, at the end of the day, wanted to prove that she had more to give, and she did. It's a remarkable story of hers.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, let's fast forward in talking about women and presidential politics. I think you reference in the book there, Hillary Clinton, after she lost the race to President Trump in 2016, she'd made the point that it wasn't her fault, it was the country's fault because the country wasn't ready for a female as president. And I wonder, what do you think about that?
I respectfully disagree with her. I think if, when I ran in South Carolina, South Carolina was the lowest in the country on women elected officials. And everybody was, said, wasn't it hard? How did you do it? Yes, it was hard, but it's equally hard for men and for women. You have to be the right person, the right communicator with the right policies. It's not about what label they want to give you. And you can't go and blame people and say, oh, they didn't want a woman. The reason South Carolina was lowest in the country on women elected officials was because women didn't run. But when women run, women win. So she didn't, but, that's not because... But that's not because anybody held her back. It's because she didn't have policies that represented the country at the time. She wasn't the type of leader people wanted to see in America. And so what I talk about in the book is what I think feminism is that women, we don't need quotas. We don't need special help. We don't need somebody to feel sorry for us. We need opportunities. And when you give us an opportunity, women work hard and they prove they deserve to be in the room. And so that's what I would tell all women is don't ever let them say that we have a hard time, just because we're not victims. We don't have a hard time. We may choose not to do something. But when we decide to do something, we put 110% into it. We're perfectionists by nature, and we work hard to get it done. So, I think that was kind of sour grapes for her to say that. But I think it's all about being the right person at the right time.
Yeah, amen. Another quote from the book. I never seem to fit the mold. If you don't fit the mold, break the mold. Our job won't be done until we know our daughters won't have any molds left to break. So, glass ceiling. Do you still perceive there are glass ceilings in America today for women?
So, I think about how I was raised. I was born and raised in that small rural southern town. We were the only Indian family. My father wore a turban, still does to this day. My mother wore a sari. We weren't white enough to be white. We weren't black enough to be black. They didn't know who we were, what we were, or why we were there. And I remember when I would get teased on the playground and come home, my mom would say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And it's amazing how that lesson from the playground played throughout my life, whether it was in the corporate world, whether it was as governor or as ambassador. When you're faced with a challenge, if you first talk about the things you have in common, people let their guard down, and then you can work towards a solution. So nothing in my life has been easy, and there have never been any lines to the women's bathroom in any of the jobs that I've had. But that's why we do what we do, right? Is because I don't want it to be talked about first anymore. Let's get rid of the first so that we can start holding the ladder down and see more people do things. And so, glass ceilings, that implies that you've got something holding you down. I think it's better just to push forward. The biggest thing that women need to do is to learn to push through the fear. Because women are wired differently. We second guess ourselves. When there's a challenge, we take a step back. And instead of taking a step back, when you lean in and you push through the fear, you find out how much stronger you are on the other side. If I didn't push through the fear, I never would have run against a 30-year incumbent. If I didn't push through the fear, I wouldn't have run for governor. If I didn't push through the fear, I wouldn't have taken the position as ambassador. When you push through the fear, you live life. If you don't push through the fear, you never know what could have been.
Yeah, just like, that's right. Okay, whether man or woman, are leaders born or are they made?
Leaders decide to do something, because I think everybody has characteristics that would allow them to be a leader. It's more of if that passion is inside of you. I've always wanted to, I think part of it was my upbringing, that my parents always said the best way to appreciate your blessings is to give back. And so I always wanted to give back. I always wanted to serve. I always wanted to fix things. That was always, I'm just a problem solver by nature, so I like fixing things. I would like to think everybody could be a leader. It's what I tell my kids. It's if you want to be a leader. And that's the part about the book that we really talk about is any one of these women, you never would have guessed that they would be leaders in what they did. But it was the sheer will that allowed them to do what they did. And so, you look at Virginia Walden Ford. She was a single mom who lived in a crime-ridden area of Washington, D.C., and she desperately wanted a good education for her son. And she said it was the segregation of her time that she was forced to have to send her son to the school, the public school that was there. And you shouldn't have to, you shouldn't educate a child based on where they're born and raised. You should educate a child based on the fact that they deserve a good education. And so she fought. And she fought to get a coalition, and she fought for school choice, and she testified in front of Congress. And the amazing part of all of that is she had a terrible fear of public speaking. But she so loved her son that she pushed through that and ended up getting school choice passed, and didn't just help her son, she helped thousands of children in the process. And so I think that those are the stories that show everybody can be a leader. If you find something you're passionate on and you really want to make a difference, that will get you through it.
Yeah. You have formed an organization called Stand for America, and I think one of the principal tenets that you talk about is all about opportunity. Now, there's a word that gets thrown around in this day and age called equity. Talk to us about the difference between equity and opportunity.
Again, I go back to when, the way I was raised was my parents always said, whatever you do, be great at it and make sure people remember you for it. And now we're seeing a time where they're wanting to treat everybody the same. Well, if you treat everybody the same, you're dumbing them down. You're not allowing them to show their best potential. We want to lift up everybody, not just segments of the population. We want to lift up everybody, because you never know who the Nadia Murad is. You never know who the Virginia Walden Ford is. You never know who could be. I grew up in a small rural town. We didn't know what we didn't have. If that were the case and you treated me based on equity, I would never have had the ability to shine. And so I think all of these things where they want to give everybody a trophy, or they want to, go and make everybody feel better. You see in certain high schools now, they're dropping AP classes because they think that it's unfair for minorities. That's so racist. It's so racist to do that. It's also racist. It's also, you look at what's happening in education, and I think, it's not overblown to say critical race theory is bad. Here you have a 5-year-old girl going into kindergarten, and you're telling her if she's white, she's bad, and if she's brown or black, she's never going to be good enough, and she's always going to be a victim. Why would, all in the name of equity, all in the name of, doing it, and then you're going to go and you're going to take from some people who didn't go to college and make them pay for those that did go to college. Where's the equity in that?
I want to talk about the United Nations for a minute. Conservatives, Republicans, people of all stripes, often in America, look at the United Nations and sometimes just think, what an incredible waste of our money, of our resources, of our time.
They're not wrong.
Yeah. Well, you're a leading authority on the subject, having had the role that you did. Tell us, is the United Nations, should we just blow it up, or what is its value?
The United Nations, the concept of the United Nations is good, because what they initially thought was if you put 193 countries in a room in the name of peace, good things would happen. The problem is all 193 countries don't share the same values. They don't have the same goals. So that concept doesn't work. And, you know, the United Nations is not for the faint at heart. I always felt like, you know, every day I felt like I was putting on body armor. I knew we'd have a fight. I just didn't know which country we were going to fight that day. So what I focused on trying to do was just make sure that all of those countries knew what America was for and what we were against. I didn't care if they didn't like me, but I wanted them to respect America. And everyone says, you know, then why do we stay in the United Nations? The reason we stay in the United Nations is because there's only 5 of those countries that have a veto. It's us, the UK, France, Russia, and China. If we walked away, we wouldn't have the ability to stop bad things that Russia or China might do. I will tell you this, though. There was one thing I took away that I think we need to do more of, and that was when we moved the embassy, or we had made the decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and were, you know, condemned for it around the world. I was proud to give the first American veto, but then we went to the General Assembly where there were all 193 countries. And we managed to get 68 not to vote against us, which, believe it or not, in the UN, that was a win in that condemnation. But I came back to the office and I told my staff, I said, I want to put a book together. And we listed all 193 countries. And the next column, I said, I want you to put the percentage of times they voted with us and against us. And I wanted the last column to be how much foreign aid we give them. And I took that book and I gave it to the president. He lost his mind. He was flipping pages, yelling out countries, and I said, you know, I didn't give you this book telling you that foreign aid should be decided based on a percentage vote at the UN, but it should be one of the factors. You know, we need to understand that this should be strategy. You can't buy friends. It doesn't matter how much money you give to a country. If they say death to America, they're just going to take your money and continue to say death to America. And so we were giving $1 billion in military aid to Pakistan. They were turning around and harboring terrorists that were trying to kill our soldiers. We stopped giving that $1 billion in aid. America needs to learn how to be strategically smart. I don't care if there's the smallest country. If they want to partner with us, if we see that we can do some sort of national security alliance with them, it's worth it. But stop trying to give money to everybody and think that it's going to get you anything. It's not. We've got enough issues of our own. Let's pick and choose who we want to be strategic partners, and let's go with that. And the rest of it, quit giving all this money away. That was the big takeaway.
Okay, I want to turn to some current events in just a minute, but before I do, talk to us about someone that you and I have a mutual passion or interest in, and that is one of the 10 in your book, Amelia Earhart. Tell us about Amelia Earhart.
Amelia Earhart is someone that whenever you mention her name, everybody loves to talk about how she went missing. But they don't talk about how amazing she was. She was a female pilot and was considered the first woman to fly a plane. And she hated that because she actually didn't fly. 2 men flew. She was just on the plane, and she said she was just baggage. So she, on her own, fought for female pilots, and they would not let females fly unless they had a man next to them. So she really fought to make sure that women could fly on their own. She created a group called the 99s. There were 99 female pilots. And what I loved about Amelia Earhart was she loved to see other women do well. She would cheer them on. She would fight for them. She didn't just do things in a silo. She really fought for a voice for all women pilots. And I love that about her. And so it was a story that I thought was really important, that people needed to know more about all the great things she did and not just about the fact that they wonder what happened to her.
Let's talk about our southern border, or or lack thereof. During President Biden's term thus far, it's estimated that somewhere between 2 and 3 million people, call them what you might, illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, undocumented immigrants, there's any number of names. What is going on down there in your mind?
There have been enough illegal immigrants that have crossed the border since Biden took office that would create the 3rd largest city in America. Think about that. That's what's happened. And look, we are a country of laws. The second you stop being a country of laws, you give up everything this country was founded on. We had enough fentanyl cross the border in July that would kill every single American. This is dangerous. And my parents, they came here legally. They put in the time, they put in the price. We take care of my parents. They're 87 and 89, they live with us. There is not a time we sit down for dinner that my mom doesn't say, are those people still crossing the border? Because legal immigrants are more patriotic than most Democrats these days. They know what they sacrificed to get here. They don't want to see anyone getting a pass to be here, and it's dangerous. And, you know, if you remember, President Trump had a terrible border issue. And when he did, I was on the ground in Honduras and Guatemala. And what we knew is the reason they were coming over at that time from those countries in El Salvador was because of gangs, trafficking, and drugs. And so what we did was our military worked with theirs and said, we'll teach you how to combat the gangs. And we trained them to combat gangs. We put drug boats on the water to keep the drugs from coming through. But we said, but in return, you have to make sure people stay in your homeland and process in if they want to come. Then he put the Remain in Mexico policy. And they started slowing down because nobody wanted to stay in Mexico because it was too dangerous. Then they stopped catch and release so that people knew if you wave the green flag, people will come. It is the best country in the world. Of course they're going to come. But we have got to start getting that back in order. It is irresponsible, it's reckless, and it's dangerous what's happening. And God bless those Border Patrol agents because they don't deserve it.
You bet. Earlier this year, Putin, Russia, invades Ukraine. Okay, the situation develops. The Ukrainians fight back. They start getting the upper hand. And now Putin is talking about the potential use of battlefield nuclear weapons. Are we about to experience nuclear annihilation?
Well, let's go back to how this started. We would not have a war with Russia and Ukraine had it not been for the debacle in Afghanistan. My husband is a combat veteran. He deployed to Afghanistan. We all know people who deployed, served, and some who lost their lives. The idea that we would go and leave Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades because we asked them to be there. Think about what that told our friends. More importantly, think about what that told our enemies. Then you have Russia that hacked the pipeline and the food processing plant. Do you remember that? Russia didn't do that to destabilize us. They did that to see how we would react. Do you know what we did? Nothing. Now you've got Biden falling all over himself to get into the Iran deal, you know, #1 state sponsor of terror that says death to America. And we're not allowed in the negotiating room. And the lead negotiator for us is Russia. So we're allowing one enemy to negotiate with another enemy for us. All that does is show blood in the water. And Putin smelled weakness and he moved. Now that he's moved in, everybody gave Ukraine 5 days tops to make it. It has been awe-inspiring to see those men leave their women and children and go fight for their country. The women making Molotov cocktails. We should all be inspired by that because that used to be us. We used to fight that hard for our country. We used to love our country that much. We used to be willing to defend it. So now they're doing this. This is more than a war about Ukraine. This is a war about freedom. And it's a war we have to win. Now, that doesn't mean we send blank checks to Ukraine. I am opposed to that. But we make sure they have the equipment they need to defend themselves. And we do it with NATO. And we should be getting with NATO saying, what are you sending? What are you sending? What are you sending? And spread it around. But if Ukraine wins this, if Ukraine wins this war, it will send a huge signal to Iran, to North Korea, and most importantly, China. So we've got to stick with it. We've got to make sure we finish. Putin is falling. He's lost the confidence of his people. He's lost the confidence of his military. They have raised the draft age in Russia to 65. Everybody's thinking about how old they are right now. And he's lost a dozen or so generals, and so he's feeling put in a corner. Is he dangerous enough to use a nuclear weapon? He could be, and we should assume. The lesson that we should remember is if a tyrant says they're going to do something, you should believe them. So if Putin said he was going to take Ukraine, we watched him do it. China said they were going to take Hong Kong, they did. Putin said Poland and the Baltics are next, we better believe him. China says that Taiwan is theirs. It's not if, it's when. But you don't run for the hills. You put your foot on the gas and you stay strong because he's looking for an out. He's not going to wave the white flag, and we will handle whatever comes our way. But he's losing, and we just have to keep strong in this because two things will happen if we don't. One, if he goes on and he wins, then he will go into Poland and the Baltics, and then we've got a full-on world war. We don't want that. The second thing is, if we say, oh, you know, Ukraine should settle, I want you to think, what if they took Texas? Would we say, okay, you can have Texas, that's fine? Ukrainians shouldn't have to give up any of their land. If they want to settle, it's up to them. And not only that, he took Crimea and nobody did anything about it. That's why he came back. He'll continue to do it over and over again if we don't stop him. And so we have to stop him.
Yeah, you bet. Very, very different issue. How do you feel social media has changed our world, changed politics, changed how you might run for office? Is it on balance a good thing, a bad thing?
I mean, social media is, you know, I always say if you open a door, be careful what you open because you can't close it. And social media is one of those things. You look at it from a global perspective. This is how regimes are now trying to influence our elections. We saw it in 2016. We're seeing it again in 2020. They don't change the vote of the elections, but for example, in 2016, Russia would go on Facebook and create these rallies that were based on racism, that were kind of white supremacy oriented. And Americans would show up to them not knowing that Russia had coordinated the rally. And we're now seeing Iran is doing it. China's now starting to do it. Russia's going to continue to do it. We're seeing North Korea do a little bit of it. So that part is going to continue to happen. The door is open. So what should we do to fix it? The tech company said when they started this, if we do this, we need Section 230 because we believe in freedom of speech and we don't want to get sued for anything anyone says. At the time, that made sense, right? But the tech companies changed the rules. Now they've decided that they're going to decide what free speech looks like. That means we need to change the rules on them. Section 230 should not apply to them anymore. The second thing is we should demand total transparency. They should have to tell us what their algorithms are. It's amazing to me how I literally might get 20 new followers a day, 30 new followers a day. You'd see you weren't getting any traction with a post, And the second Elon Musk said he was going to get Twitter, I got 50,000 followers in one day. It's because they lifted the algorithms. They are suppressing what people see. And you can see it on any post at any given time. So I do think they should have to show us the algorithms. The other thing is I think people should have to prove who they are. You know, like I have a blue check mark because I had to prove who I was. Everybody should have to do that. If we did that, we get rid of all the Russian bots, the Chinese bots, the Iranian bots, and then people would have to stand up for what they're saying, because many of them hide behind these, you know, these false names. No, if you're gonna say something hateful, you need to say it and let us know who you are. And I think if we did those three things, we could actually fix social media so that it could be a source for good.
Yeah. You know, one of the positive outcomes, if there were any on the pandemic, is cameras were brought into the home of America where parents now actually had an ability to peek in to the classrooms that their children were attending, and many didn't like what they see. Should parents have more control, more say over the curriculum of their children, or are the teachers the recognized experts?
We have one job, and that's to make sure that we raise our children in a way that they are more successful than we are, or they have more opportunities than we do. And we all know that the only way to do that is to make sure that they get a good education. And what's happened in education has been a tragedy, because it actually wasn't COVID. We had problems with education before COVID. 65% of fourth graders in America, pre-COVID, were not proficient in reading. 66% of eighth graders pre-COVID in America were not proficient in reading or math. Think about that. And we know if a child can't read by third grade, they're 4 times less likely to graduate high school. So now you go and you take the fact that we were failing our kids already with public schools. You go and you add COVID, and you take a child like where I was born and raised in rural South Carolina. You put him on a screen he's never used before, using a hotspot on a school bus down the street. Now let's pretend he's in third grade. What's he learning? Reading, history, fractions? Are the teachers' unions gonna tell his parents to hold him back? Who's gonna do something for that child? And so now we've got this situation that rather than going back and realizing that we're not teaching our kids the very basics they need to be successful, you're throwing critical race theory out there. You're worried about boys playing in women's sports, which is the women's issue of our time. All of it is lunacy. The only way to fix this is for parents to rise up and take charge, because we are more powerful than any teachers union. And we should demand school choice all over this country. Because if they're not gonna... Because when those parents looked on that screen and saw what their children were learning, what I feel bad about is those parents in South Carolina, if they didn't have, you know, the money to go and put their children in private school, do you know how awful that is to know that your child is stuck? And that's happening all over this country. Parents should not have to feel like they can't get their children the education that they need. And so I think when we really start to push, and now's the time, I think we could make a difference. The number of homeschoolers in this country quadrupled after COVID. The majority of them were African American, because they have to do what they need to make sure their children get a good education. We've got to start leading on this. I think we could win on this, and I think this is the way we'll fix our schools.
Yeah. I would like to turn to the subject, because you just pointed out that it's one of, if not the women's issues of our time. And that is this whole movement to allow transsexuals to jump right into women's sports, have men compete against women because of Because. So what's your view on that? Is it, should the rules be a certain way for certain sports like golf or another way for swimming, or no? How should we fix this?
When I was governor, the bathroom bill was happening in North Carolina. I don't know if you remember that, but they had an issue of, you had to show your birth certificate on which bathroom you were going to use or something like that. And I remember a state senator in South Carolina filed a bill. And I strong-armed him and I said, we are not having that in South Carolina, because what I knew wasn't that we didn't have transgender kids. Then we did. But parents handled it with their schools discreetly. You made sure they had a private bathroom of their own. You didn't affect everybody else's children in the process. And that's what's wrong, is they are trying to appease a small group of people, but they're hurting everybody else. Don't mess with our kids because you've got a special issue with your child. Mm-hmm. And so we have to snap out of it, because we look so distracted right now in the eyes of the world. I mean, the rest of the world is looking at us going, what is happening? And we've got to stop that. No, boys should not be playing in women's sports, period. There have been many times that girls wanted to play in boys' sports, and the guys pitched a fit and it didn't happen. I don't know why it's not happening with the girls' sports, because, like my daughter, she ran track. I would be devastated if she had to deal with a situation like that. And now you've got situations where they've got locker room issues, and you've got girls all sitting in one room, and then you've given the guy the entire locker room because they don't want to change in front of him. I mean, it's abusive.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, here's the question of the night. It's a two-part question. I know that you've said that you will support President Trump in the event he decides to run for the presidency again. So A, do you think he will run? And B, what if he doesn't?
I don't know if he's going to run. I don't. I think that, look, when he was in office, I watched, he never got an ounce of credit and he never had a moment's peace. It was a brutal process. I don't think he runs unless he knows for 100% sure he's going to win. I think there's a lot of other issues. So, I don't know at the end of the day that he is going to run or not. I can tell you, for me, we've been all over the country helping House candidates, Senate candidates. We've got 36 governor's races. We are really pushing hard to win the House and the Senate. We just did an event for the California GOP. You've got some great candidates on the ballot that are coming up that I hope you'll strongly consider. But our focus is, if we don't win in November, there is no 2024. I don't have to make a decision until January. And if there looks like there's a place for me, I've never lost a race. I'll give 1,000% and I'll finish it. And if it looks like there's not a place for me, I have fought for this country as long as I can remember, and I'll fight for her until my last breath.
Wow. All right. I cannot think of a better way to end it. Ambassador Haley, what an honor. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.